Of course, we see that tourism is becoming a commodity. It is obviously an environment of uncertainty because of the geopolitical tensions, the tariffs between European countries and the United States of America. Tourism will suffer for sure.
It's the beginning of the European travel season when people turn their thoughts to their summer vacations. But global political and economic uncertainty is casting a shadow over the travel industry this year. Joining us to break this down is Eduardo Santander. He's the CEO of the European Travel Commission. Eduardo, there's a lot happening in the world politically and economically. So is Europe still a top destination for overseas travelers?
Absolutely, it's very much a very attractive destination. And as concerns are rising now, of course, we are seeing some changes in patterns of behavior. However, when we go into the essence of bookings, is the essence of travel forecasts, we see no major change for this upcoming summer. Having said that, we consider that this is the beginning of a new period also for tourism development. We know that all kind of economic factors will definitely affect the visitors' economy, tourism, and definitely tourism flows from America and into Europe, not only from America, but from other continents too.
Yeah, let's break that down a little bit. So when we talk about who's visiting Europe, are we talking about folks coming from outside of the European Union, for example, or Europeans visiting other countries within the continent? Germans going to Italy, French travelers headed to Spain. Who are these visitors? Explain that to us.
So 85% of European tourism is intra-European tourism, meaning, like you say, Germans going to Italy, Spain, or Spaniards going to France, or Italians going to Greece, or whatever. It is obviously the biggest chunk of tourism of the almost 600 million international arrivals of tourism are made by Europeans. However, we have to take into consideration that the rest 15%, it's coming from long-haul markets or from long-haul destinations such as USA, such as China, Korea, or Latin America. And this is a trend that it's starting to be very, very important for Europe, as we see a great potential, as a catalyst for problem solving. Many of these arrivals from long-haul destinations happen in the low season, or because of the new travel trends. Many of, for instance, Chinese travelers are visiting lesser-known destinations, or destinations that are not per se, conceived as tourism hubs. There are more experiential travelers, so they are looking for more a completely different approach. And these actually not only give us a solution for many of our headaches here in Europe of periods of problems with capacity, media reports about cases of over-tourism in some places and so on. Definitely there is a way to fundamentally disperse tourism and investing more in long-haul markets.
There's a lot that you've given us there, so let's unbraid this a little bit. I was looking at some figures this morning, and it says that when we're looking at the European GDP, or a measurement of the health of the economy, 10% actually comes from tourism, but I know that's probably going to vary depending from country to country within Europe. So can you break that down a little bit? When we talk about countries that are really relying on tourism for their economic health, who are we talking about here?
Well, there's a misconception. Normally, we think about the Mediterranean basin being the most tourism-dependent economies of Europe. However, there are other countries such as Austria, such as Switzerland, such as Finland itself, that are all very much dependent. Obviously, the 10%, if it's an average EU-wise or EU-wide. However, in some regions of Europe, that GDP or that contribution to the GDP can arrive to 14, 16, and in some cases 17%. Of course, we see that tourism is becoming a commodity. People are traveling more and more. We have this post-COVID recovery effect, and we were wrong forecasting that the post-COVID travel behavior will last only for 2-3 years. That we obviously had exponential growth as people were not able to travel. They had savings. There was a pent-up demand then. But we were wrong forecasting that. Almost every institution, every organization, we thought that will end. And it didn't end, as people changed their consumption behavior, and they become saving in other aspects of their life, but not in their vacations.
There have been conversations this spring about how attractive the United States is for visitors right now, given the political climate. Can we expect knock-on effects to ripple out here to Europe? For example, could travelers who are maybe planning to go from Canada to the U.S. be thinking about Europe as a destination? Or are Europeans, I think you said it was 85% of European tourists are from within Europe. So are we expecting more Europeans to stay in Europe for their summer holidays?
Yes, we probably can say yes. And for the time being, it's only a trend, as the summer has been booked already. So we are looking into the future already. We're looking into the fall and winter season. And we see already a change of pattern. It's not massive, but there is a trend of, as you say, Canadians looking more at European destinations or Latin American destinations instead of US. The problem at glance is obviously the economy. We know that if because of the geopolitical tensions, the tariffs between European countries and the United States of America, we keep putting pressure on the economy, the tourism will suffer for sure. And we know that American citizens also have the middle class have their savings mostly in stocks and real estates. These are losing value, and therefore, probably they will stop traveling abroad if this is the case. Aviation is also suffering the consequences of tariffs. We are very dependent of good capacity between transatlantic routes, mainly between America and Europe. There is a solid consolidation there after COVID, and actually the biggest catalyst of the tourism growth after COVID was the United States. It was not China because they opened later. But however, most destinations here in Europe, they are now trying to shift towards the east. As we say, okay, there's a threat of maybe United States losing not interest, but obviously losing the capacity, losing the financial means, to travel to Europe. And we should maybe diversify more and look into untapped markets. And this we're doing in a more holistic way, trying to tap markets not only by volume, like, you would say China, of course, volume matters there. But there are other issues such as visa facilitation with China is still a big deterrent for Chinese people, to choose Europe. We are trying to, to focus more in a more thematic approach, not to actually say, okay, let's go just to China and put all our marketing budgets there and so on, but rather holistically in the continent of Asia, from Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, and of course including India and China.
Right. I want to turn to Asia in just a moment, but when thinking about Europeans who might be shying away from flying to the United States, for example, I'm wondering if this is also going the other way around. Speaking from my own experience, my mom is still very excited about coming to visit me in Europe this summer, but I have a friend from the US who doesn't want to leave and travel right now. In terms of the bookings, as you said, the bookings for the summer are pretty much in place right now. Are we seeing any kind of fall off or cancellations, or what do those figures concretely tell us right now?
I think the booking behavior now is very much on hold. It's rather that a cancellations. People are not booking as a normal they would do in a normal year. However, this year hasn't been normal. It was an election year. In November we had obviously the geopolitical tension still in Europe, in Ukraine. We have conflicts in the Middle East. It is obviously an environment of uncertainty, and this is obviously one of the biggest enemy of tourism is uncertainty. People, when they don't know, they just don't book, and this is a little bit the situation that we are noticing now between US and Europe. I think people that have to travel are continuing traveling. It's more leisure tourism and business tourism. We see that a lot of companies who are planning events in Europe are starting to look into other destinations to do it, or stay like domestically, or stay home. Travel or business tourism is a big chunk. It's also the ones filling the planes in the transatlantic route. Is one also providing the yield for the air companies, so for the airlines. And this could have a spillover effect on airlines, again reducing capacity, and that will increase the price again, and would make obviously traveling between America and Europe more complicated.
Right. Let's talk about this trek for many travelers from overseas. By nature, it's going to be quite the journey. A recent survey from your organization, the European Travel Commission, found that fewer people are interested in long-haul travel to Europe specifically. Let's break down those numbers a little bit. What did your organization find?
I think what we see is, again, what I was explaining before, that there is concerns, there is economical concerns, there is also the concern that's been, since it's already almost 5 6 years that people are becoming more environmentally conscious, so that long haul travel starts suffering a little bit of a bad image with regards, to CO2 emissions. It's also like the big equation of travel is time and money, and the more money and the more time you have, the longer and the yeah, the more expensive you travel. And this is, when the economy is suffering, and also a lot of policies after COVID are no longer in place. As you know, teleworking is starting to be like reduced, or working from abroad is, a lot of companies are coming to the conclusion they're preferred to call their employees back to the headquarters. And so, so we see that there would be some reduced travel to Europe. This is not going to be probably statistically significant, but definitely, the issue of rising costs in Europe, in European destinations, is playing a big role. We have benefited also from a very strong dollar for at least 3 4 years now, and if that strong dollar start not to be the case, obviously people will look into other places to go. So it's not rocket science. However, the domino effect that it has in planning, in destination management, is massive. As you know, some destinations have been very much putting all their efforts in specializing in the American traveler, for instance, like some Mediterranean destination, but also very boutique destinations in Northern Europe and so on.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the falling dollar, because that has me thinking about currencies around the world. We talked about this turn towards the east, for example, and the falling yen, or the yen against the euro anyway, has lost quite a bit of value. How difficult does that make it for potentially Eastern travelers? We talked about Japan in this specific example, but how difficult does it make it for Eastern travelers to come to Europe and spend money like they used to?
In the case of Japan, is a classic um, case of devaluation of the yen, and obviously, like traveling to Europe becoming very expensive exercise. So, and therefore, like obviously, to access to that market, and to attract them, becomes an exercise of targeting very much, travelers with a very specific need, of a very specific, what we call passions group. The Japanese market, of course, is not booming in terms of volume, but it's booming in terms of quality. There are less Japanese people coming into Europe, but those who come spend more time and spend more money here, as they are very specialized. They are specialized, whether it's like music, whether it's like any kind of sports, golf, for instance, very big in Japan. But definitely, cultural aspects such, art exhibitions, and like a gastronomy, of course, play an essential role. So our commitment, to these markets that are suffering economically, is that we are trying to fight that, or counter fight that, in a way that we offer destinations with a very very concise focus on these needs of these markets.
We've seen destinations within cities become almost social media famous. People want to get that selfie in front of, a sunflower field, for example, or a specific landmark. And last summer, even on my social media living here, I was seeing this idea of like a European summer was quite popular. I guess my question is, are we seeing what was once micro destinations now being so trendy, applying to entire continents? Like, is Europe over when we're talking about trendy summer destinations?
Yeah, well, we'll see. There are some hotspots, of course. We cannot deny the facts that there are some hotspots in Europe that have, as you rightly were saying, that have been like featured in social media channels. And obviously, influencers have been also playing their own role in the, also how can I say, discovering places that were not so famous and making them knowledgeable and available for many others to visit. This is a trend that it's happening not only in Europe. Like we have issues in some particular places in Europe, at very particular times. Sometimes when we talk about overcapacity or over tourism, or I tend to call it unbalanced tourism. And that normally happens is in a few places and very anecdotally. Anecdotally, meaning that not during the course of the year. It's just two, three, five times where these destinations are totally crowded and they don't look like the Instagram picture that we've seen on our phones, where people obviously depict themselves in the best possible manner. So that brings me to the point, how we reach a point of no return. I would say no. I think what we have to shift into, more than promoting destinations via influencer, via social media, is to start managing them, managing flows. And obviously, if we have increased congestion, we have to act a little bit as we did in the 80s with the traffic. We have to put some kind of regulation. We have to put some kind of taxes. Why not? And I would not say fines too. But of course, misbehavior cannot be tolerated, like we see in some places where people are not respecting, the local population, or they are not appealing for the destinations to welcome them because they don't produce any kind of value for the local inhabitants or for the local economy.
You're talking about how can we incentivize tourists to behave well, right? And there's this stick idea of it, punishing people who aren't behaving well in these situations. But I'm wondering, are there examples of cities who are incentivizing, kind of using the carrot side of things, incentivizing tourists to maybe explore different parts of town, or bringing their economic power into places where maybe they wouldn't have gone, outside of the city center? Are there incentives and not just punishments that have been working in recent years?
Oh, definitely. Obviously, sorry, when I was mentioning the fines or the punishment, there are not such a thing. Obviously, what authorities do, normal local authorities, is impose like a tourism tax that, normally makes
Right.
travel a little bit more expensive, but that doesn't solve the problem. I've never seen, or I've never been presented with a tourism tax that empirically solves the problem and reinvest in tourism causes, or tourism businesses, or tourism investments that contrast, or really try to fight the negative effects of tourism, if you want. So tourism tax or fines or negatives is not the solution. Here we are a big advocates of dialogue, and that dialogue is like a difficult triangle between the visitor, between the inhabitant, and between the entrepreneur. And we talk about placeholder, and it's the placeholder paradox. When someone is traveling into a destination, or when someone is living there, or someone is investing, they all somehow are placeholders of the place. And what national tourism organizations were, my own organization, the European Travel Commission, is doing, is becoming that referee, becoming that platform of dialogue where we can influence policy. For instance, some of the destinations here in Europe are, becoming managing organizations, whether if they cash any kind of tax from the tourists, they have to explain explicitly, how this is reverted or invested into the community. Whether it's like the example of Barcelona, taking the tourism tax and investing in air conditioning for public schools, or that's in the renewal of roads, or making infrastructure better for both locals and visitors alike. But that has to be, this is where policy is it has to be translated into politics, where it has to be translated that money is not flowing in the wrong direction, or in it's actually not solving the problem but creating another one. Here again, Europe, it's probably pioneering on this, because we saw this coming before COVID. We saw completely at halt or stopping during COVID, and we see the problems coming back now. And again, when it's anecdotal, it's something that we cannot, it's a symptom that we have. The benefits of tourism for the European economy, for the European social cohesion, for the European peace project are overwhelming. But yet, and we need here, and maybe our appeal to the media is to help us also translate these benefits into what is the real life of people. Sometimes we get very much confused about the negative headlines, and there are few. We're not denying the facts, but I think just to talk the problem doesn't solve it. We have to sit down all together. All the stakeholders involved in the tourism ecosystem, and trying to find solutions to that. And solutions pass here, for management of flows, talking to other industries, as tourism is like very multi-layer. It's accommodation, it's transportation, it's hospitality, and there's a lot of interconnectivity between them.
Right. Well, a lot to consider there. Eduardo Santander with the European Travel Commission. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.